Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the 11th lecture of your course Training and Development. We were discussing the topic of training needs assessment. We had discussed the need for conducting training needs assessment. We had discussed the dimensions of training needs assessment. We had also discussed the reasons or pressure points that initiate the training needs assessment process and the outcomes of that process. We had also discussed the key concerns of managers and employees at different levels of the organization concerning organizational analysis, person analysis, and task analysis. And we had concluded our previous discussion by talking about the people who must be included in the training needs assessment process, which were the subject experts, subject matter experts, and the job incumbents. So forward to that discussion, today we are going to discuss the various training needs assessment techniques. What are the various techniques or methods through which the need for training can be analyzed or assessed? These are simple data collection techniques that are used in any data collection or information generation process. How you get information about a particular phenomena. In this instance, it is the training need of the employees of the organization. The ways in which that information can be accessed, that information can be generated, that is very similar to the data collection methods in any such inquiry in which information is required about a particular phenomena. So, the various methods or techniques through which information about the requirement for training can be accessed or can be generated, that is observation, that you observe the people doing work, कि वो काम ठीक तरह से कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं या क्या deficiency है. Observation, that is one way of analyzing the training need. Another is questionnaires, that you get questionnaires filled by the employees who are going to be trained, by the managers who will identify the training needs of their employees, and the subject matter experts can also fill the questionnaires. So you can get information through questionnaires. Then you can get information through focus groups. Focus groups, as you know, these are groups of people who sit together for a certain period of time, mostly for an hour or so, and they discuss an issue at hand. So a focus group discussion for training needs assessment would involve subject matter experts who talk about what training need is there. क्या ट्रेनिंग करवाने की जरूरत है, किन लोगों को ट्रेनिंग करवाने की जरूरत है, किस तरह से करवाने की जरूरत है. So focus group discussion about the training needs or about the requirements of training in the organization by the subject matter experts. Then another technique is interviewing, that you can individually interview the subject matter experts, and from those interviews you try to analyze what is the requirement of training. Another method for analyzing training needs is documentation. For example, the manuals or the records of the organization or the policies or rules or regulations of the organization, you can also get information from the documentation that what kind of training will be required for a person to fill a particular job position. And finally, another type of technique is online technology software. That information about training need is generated through this online technology. Online technology software is a software which identifies performance deficiencies, which identifies the employee requirements for training and forwards that to the manager or supervisor. So now we will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each of this needs assessment technique. What can be the advantages and disadvantages of each of them? First of all, we said we can generate information through observation. Observation, the advantages of observation is that it will give you first-hand knowledge about the situation or context in which the work is being performed. So that is going to give you the most realistic picture of performance. You can see what is going on. You can look at what is going on, how the work is being performed. So observation will give you the closest picture of performance. It also minimizes interruption to work. You don't have to ask someone that fills this questionnaire, please, or please spare about 45 minutes of your time so that I can have an interview with you, or spare about an hour or an hour and a half of time so that we can have a focus group or discussion. So that is something that minimizes interruption at work. So through observation, you can get a realistic picture as well as with minimal interruption to work. You don't have to ask people to leave their work and give you information. But there are disadvantages to observation as well. One is that it requires skilled observers, people who must have the knowledge and understanding about the tasks that are being performed. If they will not have the knowledge and understanding about the tasks that they are doing or they are observing, they will not be able to assess what are the deficiencies or weaknesses in the performance. And they will not also be able to identify how this can be improved. So that person must be a very skilled observer, must be able to observe in a skillful manner and also an expert of that task being performed. Another disadvantage of observation is that the employees, they become conscious that they are being observed. So when people become conscious, their behavior, they may change. The behavior may change into lesser performance because a person may become nervous that he or she is being observed. If the person becomes nervous, then the performance will go down. Whereas another effect can be that a person feels important and feels more confident and wants to show that he is a better performer than he actually is, so the performance will go up. So it can be affected. If they know that they are being observed, their performance or behaviors, they may be affected. Another way of training needs assessment is questionnaires. Questionnaires के advantages क्या हैं? एक तो ये कि questionnaires बहुत objective information draw करते हैं. जो बात पूछी गई है, उसी का आंसर आपको उसमें मिलता है. Then, they are inexpensive to administer. You just need to print a questionnaire, get it photocopied, and distribute it into your employees. and that is all the cost that is required for that. So a questionnaire is inexpensive. A questionnaire can also collect data from a large number of people. If you have to, for example, observe, you have to observe people individually. For that, you have to spend a considerable amount of time to observe those people. And even if you are observing them in a group, you need to spend a significant amount of time in observing them to arrive at a conclusion about their performance or about their weaknesses. Whereas questionnaires, they can collect data from a large number of people. Another advantage of questionnaires is that can be easily summarized. Because it is a similar kind of data, you have some structured questions. If they are closed-ended questions, then the data can be most easily summarized because there are limited options for answering a particular question. So there are only some certain answers to a particular question, and only those options are there. Everybody will be filling up one of the options that has been given in that close-ended question. If your questionnaire has close-ended questions, the data can be most easily summarized because there will be the same variables on all the questionnaires that are being filled. Even if your questionnaire has open-ended questions, you can still develop themes from the answers that are given because it is the same question that you are asking everyone. So the data can be summarized very easily, and you can conduct analysis on that by calculating frequencies and percentages and other statistical inferences. But there are certainly disadvantages of questionnaires as well. One is that questionnaires require the time of each employee or each subject matter expert to fill it up. Then questionnaires have a problem of possible low return rates. When you send questionnaires to people to fill them up, many of them, they don't fill them up and don't return them. So if you have a low return rate, then there will be problem that you do not get enough data to summarize, you do not get enough data to answer the question. A questionnaire also lacks detail because you are asking them something that is very specific. You are not asking them anything in detail, you are asking them to answer questions that have some particular given options. So a questionnaire lacks depth and it lacks detail. And obviously that only gives information about the questions that were asked. Therefore, the person who prepares this questionnaire, unless that is conversant and familiar with all the aspects of the job, all the aspects of the task, unless he knows the information about all the dimensions of that, only then that person will be able to ask questions that tap into all these dimensions. But what about the questions that come up during the process of gathering information? क्योंकि हमेशा ये जरूरी नहीं होता कि जो क्वेश्चन कर रहा है या जो एनालिसिस कर रहा है उसको ये पता हो कि क्या प्रॉब्लम्स या क्या इश्यूज के बारे में सवाल पूछना चाहिए. सो जब उसको नहीं पता तो क्वेश्चनेयर में ये वीकनेस है या डिसएडवांटेज है कि वो एरिया मिस हो जाएगा, वो एरिया निग्लेक्ट हो जाएगा जिसके बारे में क्वेश्चनेयर प्रिपेयर करने वाले ने सवाल किया ही नहीं. So that deficiency, that can be covered in interviews. Interviews, because the process of data collection or process of gathering information, that keeps going on between the interviewer and the interviewee. Therefore, the questions can be modified, the questions can be changed, and there are issues that may come up that were not previously identified by the interviewer. So the discussion can also include discussion about those issues that were not identified. So it can gather information about areas that were not anticipated by the interviewer. But again, there are disadvantages of interviews as well. The first disadvantage is that it is very time consuming. You have to spend a considerable amount of time with every interviewee. You have to give separate time for each of the participants. And because interviews, they require a considerable amount of time for each one, multiplying it with a number of participants, that would mean a considerable amount of time. So that is very time consuming. Then data is difficult to analyze. How do you summarize? Because every person has different way of talking about the same things. So how will you consolidate the information? How will you come up with similar themes in the information? Because people, they talk about the same thing in different ways. Or they may not be talking about the same things at all. One person may be talking about some issues, another may be talking about some other issues, and so on and so forth. So it is difficult to analyze the information that is gathered from interviews. An interview requires a skilled interviewer. Interview cannot be conducted by a person who is just given the task of interviewing, that go and interview this particular person. You need to be conversant. You need to be familiar with all the aspects of what is being asked. So if you are interviewing someone, you must be an expert of that area. So the interviewer has to be an expert, and that person also has to be an expert in the interviewing technique, so that he or she can explore, and he or she can get information, maximum information from the person as much as it is possible. Another problem of interviews is that it can be threatening to the subject matter experts, because subject matter experts are those people who need to identify that there is a performance problem. So if an employee needs to identify that a performance problem is there in his or her performance, or a manager has to identify that there is a performance problem in his work unit, and you are asking questions about that there is a weakness in performance in your work unit, that person will be threatened. That person will not like these questions that show or that confirm that there is a performance problem in the employees or in the work unit of the manager. So that can be threatening to the subject matter experts. Then again, interviews are difficult to schedule because every person has to conduct his work, has to work on his job, and interview is something that has to be spared some time. So that is difficult to schedule according to the routine and according to the schedule of the people who are required to be interviewed. And it is also possible that the subject matter experts, they only provide information what they think that you want to hear about. They do not give information that is candid and frank. They give information that is concealed and that they think that must be conveyed, or they think that the interviewer wants to hear. So this is the problem of, as I discussed, the problem of socialized minds, that people convey and communicate the information the other person wants to hear. Then there are focus groups. Another choice is focus groups. The advantages of, again, focus groups is that questions can be modified, in-depth data can be explored, and another advantage of focus group is that issues that are controversial or complex, that people are not willing to discuss individually, they may be ready to discuss them in a group. When they find that there is support from the group members, they are ready to talk about them. So जब आप इंडिविजुअली सेपरेट हो जाएं, आइसोलेट हो जाएं, तो उस वक्त आप किसी डिससैटिस्फैक्शन की, किसी वीकनेस के बारे में बात नहीं करेंगे. आप ये नहीं कहेंगे कि आपकी यूनिट में लोग काम नहीं कर रहे, उनकी परफॉर्मेंस लो है, उनका मोराल हाई नहीं है, उनमें मोटिवेशन नहीं है. जब आपको अकेले बिठा के ये बात की जाएगी तो शायद आप ये बातें ना कहें. लेकिन अगर आप ग्रुप में बैठे होंगे और एक ग्रुप मेंबर एक वीकनेस आइडेंटिफाई करता है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल ये कहता है कि परफॉर्मेंस लो है, और आप फिर ये कहते हैं कि परफॉर्मेंस लो इस वजह से है क्योंकि लोगों का मोराल हाई नहीं है, और फिर मोराल हाई नहीं है, तीसरा बंदा ये बात करता है कि मोराल इसलिए हाई नहीं है क्योंकि उनको इंसेंटिव्स नहीं दिए जा रहे, या मोराल इसलिए हाई नहीं है क्योंकि उनके पास स्किल्स ही नहीं है कि वो काम कर सकें, वो उनको काम करना आता ही नहीं है. ये सब डिस्कशन एक ग्रुप ने इनिशिएट की है. ये सब बातें अगर आप आइसोलेट करके करते तो एक बात भी बाहर ना आती. वेराज अगर आपने लोगों को ग्रुप में बिठा के बात की है तो ये पॉसिबल है कि ऐसी बातें जो कि लोग इंडिविजुअली ना करें, वो ग्रुप में, ग्रुप के स्ट्रेंथ की वजह से, उनकी सपोर्ट की वजह से वो बातें बाहर आए. सो फोकस ग्रुप्स आर गुड इन गिविंग यू इंफॉर्मेशन about such controversial issues. But then again, focus groups are time consuming because these people need to spare a considerable amount of time out of their work. Then it is also possible that the phenomena of groupthink will come up. You remember that we discussed groupthink, that people will conform to the same decisions, or they will conform to the same kind of information being conveyed. So वो हर कोई वही बात कहेगा जो सब कह रहे हैं, और अगर ज्यादा मेजॉरिटी एक बात कह रही है then people will not contradict. So the phenomena of groupthink can emerge. For that, the focus group, the person who is conducting the focus group, that person must be an expert in that he or she is able to determine that this phenomena is coming up, people are not speaking up, people are not disagreeing. So that person should try to counter that by asking probing questions, by asking people specific questions, and by giving them confidence that they should participate in the discussion. So the focus group leader must be an expert in conducting focus groups. Then another way of gathering information for needs assessment is documentation. Documentation, for example, manuals, for example, a manual of a machinery or manual of an equipment will give you information what kind of skill a person will need to operate that machine or that equipment. You can get the information from the documentation. Then you can get information about the rules and procedures, about the company policy. For example, eligibility for a particular job position. What is the mix of skills, abilities, and behaviors required to fill a particular job position? So if you want your employees to develop those skills so that they can succeed the positions that will become vacant, you will get information from the documentation of your company. It is also useful in getting information or in designing training programs for new jobs. Because if there are new jobs in your organization, you will not be able to get information through observation or through interviewing or through focus groups, because nobody is doing that job at the moment in your organization. So documentation would be the only source of information that can give you the specifications about the skills and abilities required to perform a particular task. Disadvantages of this technique may be that you do not understand the technical language of these manuals or booklets. So you need to be a technical expert if it is a manual of a machinery or an equipment, or you need to be an expert of the organization's policies or rules if you have to understand the human resource policies documentation. So if you are a trainer, you may not be able to understand the documentation, the language in that documentation. And it is also possible that the documentation is outdated or obsolete because the company has not revised it yet. So you have to make sure that you are referring to documentation that is up to date, that is current. Okay, so finally, the last type of technique to gather information about training needs is online softwares. Online softwares क्या होते हैं और ये ट्रेनिंग नीड्स को कैसे आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं? ये सिर्फ उन कंपनीज में पॉसिबल है जहां डायरेक्ट इंटरैक्शन है एम्प्लॉय का कंप्यूटर के साथ या फोन के साथ. सो ये ज्यादातर कॉल सेंटर्स में यूज किए जाते हैं या कस्टमर सर्विस पर्सनल जो के कंप्यूटर के साथ या फोन के साथ इंटरैक्ट कर रहे हैं उसमें यूज हो सकते हैं. इसमें क्या होता है कि आपका जो सॉफ्टवेयर है वो आपकी परफॉर्मेंस को एनालाइज करता है, आइडेंटिफाई करता है और प्रॉब्लम्स को डिटेक्ट करता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल कॉल सेंटर्स में अगर किसी एक एम्प्लॉय के पास कॉल बैक आ रही है या कोई कंप्लेंट आ रही है, वो डायरेक्टली फॉरवर्ड कर दी जाएगी ऑनलाइन सॉफ्टवेयर के थ्रू मैनेजर को. और उन्होंने एक लिमिट रखी हुई है कि 5 दफा अगर कॉल बैक आएगी या 5 दफा अगर कंप्लेंट आएगी एक कस्टमर सर्विसेज रिप्रेजेंटेटिव को, दैट विल ट्रिगर an automatic training requirement for that person. कि इसने 5 दफा गलती की है, अब इसका मतलब है कि इसको काम ठीक से नहीं आता, इसको परफॉर्म ठीक से नहीं करना आता, इसको ट्रेनिंग के लिए भेज दिया जाए. सो इसकी एक तो ये कि डिसएडवांटेज ये हैं कि एप्लीकेबिलिटी बहुत रिस्ट्रिक्टेड है, बहुत नैरो है, सिर्फ वहां पॉसिबल है जहां कंप्यूटर और फोन के साथ डायरेक्ट इंटरैक्शन है. दूसरा ये कि मैनेजर्स इसको परफॉर्मेंस मॉनिटरिंग की बजाय पनिशमेंट के तौर पे भी यूज कर सकते हैं. दीज आर द नंबर ऑफ कंप्लेंट्स दैट हैव बीन recorded about you, so now go and get the training. Therefore, people may feel threatened because they know that they are being observed, their performance is being recorded all the time. They may feel threatened that they are being monitored all the time. And you must have studied in organizational behavior that monitoring and supervision, the more monitoring and the more supervision there is, people feel dissatisfied with that. People need to feel free. People need to feel more empowered. So monitoring all the time is something that may make them uncomfortable or they may become offended by that. But the advantages of online software is that it is very objective. The limits that you have defined or the ways that you have defined to analyze performance and to analyze training gaps, the results will be given according to that limits that you have set. So that is very objective. And also it minimizes interruption to work. There is no interruption to work. Work is going on and the online software is monitoring continuously. And it also requires minimum human resources for gathering this information. There is no person required to gather information about performance and training requirements. The online software is continuously doing it on its own. So you need a person for gathering information through questionnaire, through interview, through focus groups, but you do not need a person to get information through this online software. So there is minimum human resource required to conduct this process. But all these methods, all these techniques, they have certain disadvantages and certain advantages. That means that no one method of gathering information is superior to the other. So when we cannot say that one method is superior to the other, one has one disadvantage and the other one has another disadvantage, what we need to do is that we need to gather information through multiple methods. So it is advised that you gather information through multiple sources. You get information through observation, and then you try to validate the information that you have received through observation by conducting focus groups and questionnaires or a mix of these various techniques. The more methods you will involve in your needs assessment process, the more valid your assessment will be. Because from one method, if you get one information, if you get one answer, and that is confirmed through the other method as well, that means that your analysis has been valid. So it is advised that you use multiple methods of getting information about needs assessment and performance. Companies, they are also using another type of technique to determine training needs and improving performance. Because these methods, they are time consuming, they are complex, and they may lack in validity and reliability. There is another way of doing it faster and doing it more effectively. And that is benchmarking. Benchmarking, you must be very familiar with this word as management students. Benchmarking is using information about other companies, about their training practices, so that you can determine the appropriate level, mix, type, and frequency of training in your organization. So you see other companies that are similar in context with your company, which have the similar problems and issues as your company, and try to replicate the same best practices in your organization. For this, for example, in America, a number of companies, they are member of American Society for Training and Development benchmarking forum. And on this forum, various companies, they come together, they share their best practices, they talk about their issues, and they help each other design their learning and development programs. So that is another way of determining your training needs or determining how to improve performance in your organization. All right, so we have discussed the various techniques that are used to analyze training needs. We had talked about the different dimensions of this TNA process. If you look at the illustration, you will see that the training needs assessment process starts from organizational analysis, which leads to the determination of whether training needs to be conducted or not. If it does, then person analysis and task analysis are conducted side by side, which leads to the determination of the training method and program. In organizational analysis, you can see that there are 3 aspects of organizational analysis. One is that you have to look at your strategic direction. Second is the support of managers and peers for the training program. And third is the training resources being available for conducting the training. So in organizational analysis, these are the 3 main themes that you need to identify. Whether there is link between the training with the strategic direction of the organization, is there support from managers and employees of the organization, and most important, whether there are training resources available to conduct the training or not. Organizational analysis will then lead to identifying whether we need to conduct training, yes or no, whether we have time and money to conduct training. Then we will answer the question whether we need to buy or build. And the third question, that whether we want to go for training or some other HR option like selection or job redesign. While we are answering these questions, we will also be conducting person analysis. Person analysis is conducted on 5 dimensions. These dimensions are person characteristics, input, output, feedback, and consequences. We will discuss these various dimensions in detail later on, but the person analysis will be done on these 5 dimensions. If through person analysis and organizational analysis, it is identified that training is the solution to the performance problem or the solution to the required organizational problem, then task analysis will be conducted. Task analysis is conducted on the dimensions of number 1, work activity. Work activity is the actual activities that are performed on a particular job. That is task analysis. कि एक job को करने के लिए कौन सी मुख्तलिफ activities perform करनी पड़ती हैं. And secondly, what are the skills, abilities, competencies, knowledge and behaviors required to conduct this work activity. ये भी task analysis का हिस्सा है कि वो कौन सी skills और abilities चाहिए, कौन सी महारत और इल्म चाहिए वो activities perform करने के लिए जो कि एक job की specified है. And finally, task analysis also involves the conditions in which the task is performed. So whether a person has to work at 50 degrees centigrade, or the person has to work at 0 degrees centigrade, or that person has to climb stairs, or that person has to work with heavy machinery, or that person has to carry heavy equipment. What are the conditions of the work that is involved? That is also be included in the task analysis. And after all these analyses have been conducted, you will come up with the training design and training method that is required to fill this training need. So the training method, the training frequency, the type, the way you analyze, and how the learning will take place, all these questions will be answered in the last step. Now the specific questions that you have to ask in an organizational analysis. What are those questions that a manager or a person who is analyzing training needs that needs to ask while analyzing the organization? So organizational analysis will include the question that how will the program align with the strategic needs of the organization? This is something that we are saying again and again, alignment between needs and the training program. Then, should organizational resources be devoted to this program? Is it possible to allocate these resources? Is it sensible to allocate these resources? And is it required to allocate these resources? Does the organization have so much of resources that can be allocated to this training program? What do we need the managers and employees to do so that training is effective? What kind of behaviors, what kind of actions must the managers show so that training can be effective? What kind of work environment features can interfere with the training program? If the organization has a culture which interferes with knowledge generation, which interferes with knowledge transfer, which interferes with learning, then what are those organizational characteristics that are interfering with this learning activity? Another question at the organizational level, do we have the experts to conduct this training program? If we do not have experts, and we cannot buy experts either, then even if there is a need, if it is assessed that people need training, this training will be effective, it is aligned with the business strategy, but if you don't have experts to conduct the training, then the process will stop right there. Then do the employees, they perceive that this training will bring them any rewards, any opportunity, any skills? Do the employees find this training to be beneficial to them? If they perceive that, they will be actively involved in it. If they perceive that, they will be motivated about it. But if they do not perceive the training to be beneficial, then they will not be motivated to participate in this learning activity. Another question, which persons or group have an interest in seeing training succeed? Whose support do we need? This is a very important question, that who are the people who are most interested in getting this training done? And identifying those people and getting the support of these people who are most interested in success of this training program would be beneficial for this training activity. And finally, how might the training content affect our employees' relationship with customers? Whether the relationship with customers will improve, whether the customers will be more satisfied, whether the customers will get better services. So at the end, it is the customer that needs to be satisfied in a better way. So how will a training program affect the relationship of your employees with the customers? These are all the organization level questions that must be answered within the organizational analysis of training needs assessment. From this organizational analysis, you will come to the conclusion whether you want to buy or build the training program, if you do want to conduct the training program. So if you have to build the training program, that is a separate story that will require many more sessions of discussion. But if you have to buy the training program, then you will have to identify vendors. To identify vendors, a request for proposal that is launched. That is kind of an advertisement जिसमें ये बताया जाता है कि ये इस कंपनी को इस ट्रेनिंग की ज़रूरत है. इन credentials और criteria के ऊपर जो companies या जो vendors पूरा उतरते हैं, वो अपनी proposals कंपनी को send कर दें. तो ये आप वेंडर्स को जो कि आपके पास पहले सप्लाई करते रहे हैं ट्रेनिंग प्रोग्राम्स, आप उनको ईमेल भी कर सकते हैं, न्यूज़पेपर में भी दे सकते हैं, आप अपने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में अनाउंस भी कर सकते हैं. So when you have to select a vendor for your training program, you need to ask some questions from those vendors that will help you identify which vendor should be selected to give that particular training. These questions, obviously, they include that what are the skills and expertise of your training staff, the organization, the consultancy, what kind of experience and how much experience do they have in training and development? Can they give any demonstration or example how they will conduct the training? Can they provide any client references, people who are their clients who can give references, testimonials about the effectiveness of training? Can they provide any evidence of their training programs being effective in other companies, in other organizations? How can they show that their training program is going to be effective? What evidence is there? What kind of instructional design method will be used to design the training? How does the program fit to the needs of the organization? Will the vendor provide customized training or generic products? The training program, will it be customized according to the need of the organization? Or will it be a generic program that they conduct in many other organizations as well? And finally, how much time will be required to develop the training program if it needs to be developed in a customized manner? So these are all the questions that you must be asking the vendors of training, the suppliers of training, the training consultants that are providing training to your organization. Today we have discussed the various techniques that are used to collect information about training needs assessment, and we have discussed the components of the training needs assessment process, and we have discussed the organizational level questions that must be answered to analyze training needs. We will continue this discussion. In the next session, we will talk about how to conduct person analysis and task analysis. And then we will discuss how to develop competency models. So this discussion will continue. I hope you will read what we have discussed today so that you understand our next discussion in a better manner. Until next time, Allah Hafiz.